Now here's a comparison between the X380 Yoga and the X1, both from Lenovo. They're both that ThinkPad lineup. The Carbon obviously being the higher end, the X380 being more of the standard business device. This is a very standard option for a lot of companies. Now on the X380, it does use a square power plug, which is basically another port on the side here. The Carbon uses that Thunderbolt charging, so it uses the USB-C type connector and cleans up that side a bit. So you can see the difference, both of the thickness of these devices as well as the port options. Back up a little and you can see that there's really only 3 ports on this side, and it's just the USB 3 and then 2 USB-C, and both of those can be, well, they're both Thunderbolt enabled. But you see on the X380, it's an additional port here for just the charging, just the power, and then it only has the 1 USB-C on this side along with the mini Ethernet. It's just a few millimeters wider than the X380. That side to side width is about 1 inch different. Considerable difference there as far as the footprint of these devices. You can see they both have the security lock, HDMI, USB 3. This is where the mini Ethernet port is on the X1. This does also not have an SD card port, mini or otherwise, whereas the X380 does include that. Same jack and basically the same type of power button. They both use this pen garage. Carbon, the pen is a little bit longer. The shape is a little different, with the X1 Carbon being a bit more of a sleek design at the end. The X380 is a step down, I believe 1 step down from the X1, but they're both in the Yoga family, and you can see the similarities that are shared. So there is actually an SD port back here, and something else is that the speakers are back in here on the X380, whereas on the X1 Carbon, speakers are located on either side, and they are much larger, and the sound and sound quality is fantastic from the X1. It has the Core i5 8th gen processor, which is what the X380, which just arrived, has. So the X1 I bought in August of 2018. I'm expecting similar screen. The X380, of course, should be a little inferior to the X1 Carbon. You see it's slightly taller, thicker. This sits a little lower. From a size of the keyboard comparison, keyboard here is just over 11 inches from the edge of each button to button, whereas the X380, it's less than 10.5 inches, more than half an inch on the keyboard size. So if you have larger hands, that might matter to you. Just picking them up and holding them, it's hard to tell. They're going to be very close. If I remember right, I believe this might actually weigh less. They both feature the ability, when you're sending the screen back around, the keys will recede into the deck. They both do that, and it will lock out the keyboard so it sends the device into tablet mode. For the sake of comparison, on the X1 Carbon, it has to get pretty far back around, about there, before it will actually recede the keys. This X380 has a bit of a depression here, dropping the keyboard down, whereas the X1 is flat surface-wise. So these keys actually recede when you're closing the lid on it, as well as when you're rolling it back. Whereas these only recede, but it's about the same. It's a little more smooth, it seems. This has a kind of a fulcrum point where you can tell that the keys are snapping in place when you move the screen back. Functionally, I don't think that matters much. It's something you notice. It's more of a gradual receding. Mouse pads are also different in size, about 3.5 inches wide, 2 1/8 inch tall. And this, almost 4 inches wide, approaching 2.5 inches tall. The buttons feel about the same. The travel seems to be a little deeper on the X380 than the travel on these keys, but very similar. Otherwise, looking forward to trying out the X380 and seeing how it measures up against the higher end sibling that I already own, use, and like. So I'm expecting similar performance because of the roughly equivalent processor, but we'll see.